Having goals and big dreams is a big part of personal development, but so is burnout. And so today we're talking all about how to deal with burnout in business with author, speaker, and ex executive himself, Nick Jonsson. So let's go. Nick Jonsson is founder and managing director of Executives Global Network, EGN Singapore, and #1 international best-selling author, keynote speaker, and racing extreme Ironman. He is passionate about exposing executive loneliness and bringing the discussion to the forefront. So let's do it. If you happen to be listening to this on Apple Podcasts, it would mean the world to me if you left a review. It really helps this channel get out there and raise more mental health awareness. All right, so let's jump into it. All right, Nick, welcome to the Mental Health Toolbox. I'm so glad you could make it today, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Patrick.
My pleasure, my pleasure. You have quite the story to share, so I'm excited to get into this. You want to share with listeners a little bit about yourself and what your niche is and the value you want to share?
Yeah, sure, Patrick. Let me just give you a very brief intro to myself first. So I was born in Sweden, but I left Australia in the late 90s to study. And then I found myself perhaps a little bit too far away from home. Europe, it's halfway around the world plus. So I moved halfway to Asia, and I lived in Southeast Asia since 2004, where I worked in various general manager roles, mainly the international firms, as an expatriate in mainly Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and so on. And yeah, that was my story. I wanted to chase my dreams. I want to go to the top, being a top level executive. And I made it, Patrick. I made it to the top. But was I happy when I reached the top? No, I felt isolated and I felt lonely. So that's a little bit about my story that I'm happy to share with you.
Wow, excellent. Because I know a lot of people, they get the shiny object syndrome, and then we can pursue big dreams and lose ourselves in the process. So I'm sure you have quite the wealth of experience to share with us. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you've seen quite a bit of the world, sounds like. That's
Yes,
exciting.
Patrick.
Yeah.
Mm.
Excellent, excellent. So how did you get into mental health? What led you down this road?
Well, it came by experience and firsthand experiencing it. And as I mentioned, when I was working as an executive, I really was just focused on goals. I was focused on goal settings, really reaching, delivering the results, making the bosses happy, and making the promotions and getting the bonuses. And that was what was important to me. I didn't really care so much for other people during these years. I was very selfish. And uh, eventually this led to my crash, Patrick. I had a mental health breakdown in 2015, which led to a resignation from my job, a divorce from my ex-wife, and also to a complete breakdown on my health. I ended up in emergency care, and I had at this time suffering from anxiety, stress, depression, and also I picked up alcoholism on top of it. So that was my experience, and then how I managed to get out of this.
Wow, sounds like a bit of a snowball effect.
Yes,
But
yes, and
you had
it's very
mentioned
common.
you had mentioned right there that you had to neglect a lot of things in order to pursue your goal. What did that look like? What did that feel like making those choices?
I was so focused on them that I didn't even think for a second. And I joined many of the seminars, the books, the audio books of all these gurus who's taking, goal achieving, and you're setting aggressive goals, and a lot of them out of America. And while it works, but yeah, you achieve your goal, but are you really, really going deep inside yourself and taking a breath and thinking for a moment, is this what makes me happy? No, they are set up to make you achieve. And perhaps we live, Patrick, in a society that actually gives you credit for achieving, who really look up to people who are delivering at the highest level. And I was, as you said, the word is called Snowball. Once you're inside that, then it's hard to break out of it. And my way of perhaps relaxing at that time, because I was running at so high steam, was indeed perhaps going to the bar after work to drink alcohol. And that's not the way to go deep and reflect about yourself. That was my way of winding down, but that was the wrong way.
Absolutely. So in retrospect, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? Because we don't necessarily want to forego our dreams, right? So how do you find that middle ground?
I think we need to really perhaps look into ourselves also and think about our purpose in life. What is it that makes us happy, and what is it that we want to achieve? And not only develop out steps for your goals, but also look at what is the purpose and see so that there's an alignment there. And that is the alignment that I didn't have at the time. I didn't, for example, have a coach to work on with that with me. I didn't have a mentor who focused on the purpose and my happiness and these kind of things and my well-being. I was just focused on the achievement, and that is, I think, very, very common, Patrick. And I, in my book, I'm talking about this, and the effect that comes out of this I call a smiling depression. And
Mm,
what I mean with that is that especially all executives, and you see it, for example, on LinkedIn profiles, everyone has to look so great. You need to be
mhm.
on the speaker panels, you need to be in the news, and you have to look fantastic for your organization. But what is it behind the scene there? That is what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, we often, we talk a lot about social media and how much of a trap it can be with the comparative thinking. And we hear a lot about that from Instagram and Facebook, but few people talk about LinkedIn as being the same kind of trap. But for for those, like you said, the executive types, the entrepreneurs, right? With that comparative thinking, seeing everyone so polished and broadcasting what they're accomplishing and what they have to offer. How did that become a trap for you?
Well, I think, well, both you and I are on LinkedIn, Patrick, and
Hmm.
my business survives on it. So it's very hard to avoid LinkedIn. My recommendation is not to be to turn off LinkedIn. Indeed, I need to be there as well. But it is about also the alignment there and perhaps sharing authentically. And if I'm looking at my LinkedIn profile today, yes, I have about my job, which is with EGN, Executive Global Network, where we do confidential peer groups for senior executives. That's one part of my LinkedIn profile. But I also share that I'm a volunteer for SOS, Samaritans, a suicide prevention agency, a 24 hours hotline here in Singapore. I share about my volunteer job there. So it's really need to be balanced. And I'm also sharing about my mental health, and I'm very transparent and honest about it there. So if you have a look at my LinkedIn now, hopefully you see a balanced view.
Wow, like you were just talking about that aligned, approach, right? With your values and also your business. And you can have both, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Good, good. So when in your pursuit of success, do you feel like your mental health started to take a hit? And what were those red flags? Do you think that maybe you just weren't aware of, or maybe you were kind of, but you ignored?
Well, I didn't see any. I think I was in denial, and I think that's very common, Patrick. When you achieve a goal, you push things away, and you push perhaps people away who are trying to come in your way. You just ignore them because you're so focused, and you've been told and trained to ignore it, and that's why you reach the top. But when you're stepping on the toes and going through a divorce and perhaps also not treating your family members in the best way, that's when you know it's not good. And even if you don't perhaps feel anything at the time, and that is one thing in me, I probably didn't feel much at the time, but it will catch up with you eventually. And you will become very lonely and very isolated. That is very common. When I interviewed executives for my book, and you're asking them how they reach the top, it is a lonely affair. It's many times elbowing your way to the top.
Hmm. So it sounds like that's a red flag when you start to feel numb to other people's um, pleadings, right? When they see loved ones that see you, maybe it was your wife, maybe it was your children, maybe it was your friends, when they see that you are hurting yourself in your pursuit, or maybe you're neglecting things, and they try and warn you, that numbness sometimes to those warnings is a red flag in itself.
Yes, definitely. And then other flags, of course, is things such as picking up some addictions or gaining, losing weight, or yeah, or being moody, snappy, and and perhaps even you lose your temper and things like that because the pressure you put on yourself is simply too much to be able to hold it together. And I try to balance sport and alcohol. Those were my ways to relax between all the work, and both are highly accepted, and that's very common also among senior executives these days. I'm glad though, Patrick, I since I came into recovery, I have managed to avoid alcohol for 4 years, and I live a
Wow,
more
congratulations.
yeah, I live a
It's a
more
big
calm
deal.
life, and I can work on go deeper inside myself and identify instead what is the feelings, and rather than rush through it and numb it with things, I deal with it.
It's fantastic. Yeah, the self-care is huge. Although executive, I'm guessing that when it came to personal fitness, you were probably overachiever as well. Did I see something about an Iron Man in there in your bio?
Yes, yes. And when you have an addictive personality, it's hard to let go. It takes a while. And I say, well, at least if you can change your bad addiction to a good one. So, yes, I do Ironman training, Patrick, and it's a swim, bike, and run, and it keeps me it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me fit, and yeah, it keeps me alert and focused. And that's my way, I should say, to deal with things. But I would say also it's actually the time when I go deep inside myself. When I go for a jog or a bike ride, I get that time for myself. And rather than having that time for myself sitting in a bar, drinking or doing something else, I get the me time. And I need a lot of time for myself to think. And it's when I don't have a mobile phone with me and I can really switch off the rest of the world and think and reflect. So for me, it's almost like a meditation also.
That's fantastic. So in therapy, we call that sublimation, right?
Okay,
How
great.
healthy sublimation. Have you ever seen the old movie Analyze This, where I forget what's the actor's name is escaping me, but he tells the therapist tells was it Al Pacino? I think it's Al Pacino. Tells him to punch a pillow and he takes a gun and he shoots the pillow. It's like that old thing where you you punch a pillow, and obviously with all the research now we know that that's not a healthy way to express frustration is punching things, right?
Mm.
But running, exercising, finding other creative outlets to express our emotions, right? That's healthy sublimation. It sounds like that was really at your center, something that really helped you and continues to help you with your mental health and sobriety, is that level of self-care, and like you said, being able to turn off the phone, turn off the digital influences, and just have that space, that protected
Yes.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been at the top and you've come full circle, it sounds like. And along the way, you said you picked up some addictions with alcohol, you battled with depression. And you talk about it in a nutshell, like, but what kind of time frame are we actually looking at? Did this burnout, if we want to call it that, did this burnout transpire for you?
Yeah, so basically, Patrick, it started a bit in 2014, and I'm also bipolar, I should say. So I think I was in 2014. I was very overconfident, and that's why I felt I deserved a better wife, I deserved a better
Mhm.
job, and I pushed things away from me. And I'm being very honest and very
Mhm.
transparent here in the way I'm describing it, and it sounds very selfish because that's how I perhaps see it now when I'm looking back at it. If you ask me even a few years ago, I wouldn't see it like that, but that's my reflections now. So in 2014, I was indeed overconfident and things were not good enough for me in my life. And in 2015, I lost it all, and resigning from a job then without even, having something else new lined up. Indeed, I was probably delusional at this stage. So without a plan going forward, I was quite lost. So 2016, 17, where I jumped from job to job, uh, low pay. I moved from country to country, and I didn't know what was home. I was very lonely, and that led me to my knees. And it was only in 2018 I moved to Singapore when I started to seek help, get help, and then the recovery was very quickly Patrick, when I have started to talk about this. First, it was to doctors, then it was to my new wife who I married, who I explained how I felt. And she and the doctors helped me to find an anonymous support group where I started to really get the help I needed. And so in May 2018 started my recovery, and it's been a wonderful journey since then on.
Excellent, excellent. So there was a good 4 years where you were burning the candle at both ends, putting your own mental health needs on the back burner. At that point in your life, because you would have been around what age? 40,
47
38?
now.
Okay, you're 47 now. So in 2014, quick math, when you first started pushing yourself that hard, how old would you have been roughly?
So I'm born 75. So we're talking 40, around 40 years old.
Yeah, about 40. And so that is, a lot to put on yourself, that kind of pressure, that kind of energy. And it took 4 years for you to get the help that that made the difference, right? During that time from like 40 to 44, were there any opportunities to get help? Did anybody offer you help? What did that look like?
I lived in Indonesia and Vietnam at that time, and it was not much of mental health support and this kind of help there. So that was one issue. I remember searching in Google for help. I remember thinking, reaching out to a psychotherapist. I couldn't find some expatriates, only locals, and perhaps the language barrier and so on. So while it crossed my mind, let me put it this way, I didn't put in enough effort. Yeah, I should obviously have flown to another country or checked into a rehab and so on, but I was all on my own, and there was no one really telling me. Of course, I had friends, but I was quite well at hiding. And again, as I said, smiling depression. If you ask people and good friends who knew me during this time, they would think everything was normal. In fact, the one gentleman is writing in my forewords of the book that he thought I was, doing fantastic. And I made sure everything looked fantastic. And everything I said, the reasoning why I moved from one country to another was changed, and why I wanted to try this job sounded fantastic. I was very good at packaging it, but behind the scene, it was not all good. And because I had been working so hard for many years up to the way, everyone and close friends said, "Good on you, Nick, for testing this job or doing this assignment and doing something else, and it's good to see you enjoying life, that you're not so serious." And that was me, perhaps traveling and drinking and and having a good time, but it was just too excessive, and that was what was going on. So no, I didn't get help, Patrick. It was only in 2018, and one reason I wanted to take a job in Singapore was because obviously Singapore is much more of a regional hub, and all the services are there related to mental health and medical and so on. And it's a developed country compared to Vietnam and Indonesia. So I had a dream, and I promised myself that I would seek help in Singapore, but it took me 4 or 5 months before I managed to do so. I had to really be brought to my knees. I had to get really unwell first, and it was alcohol that really spiraled out when I moved to Singapore. And that was really what got me to surrender in the end as well.
I see. And so it wasn't just the lack of resources, it was also, like you say, the smiling depression and sometimes the pride, not when I put your best foot forward, which a lot of driven people do, right? We're taught to put on a happy face and show our highlights, right? And not necessarily show our bellies, in terms of our weaknesses and what we're struggling with, even to those closest to us, right? And when you moved to Singapore, was it top of mind for you when you moved that, hey, this is more of a industrial setting, there's gonna be more access to services, or did that only come after you got connected with your wife and your now wife, I'm assuming?
Yes, she's now
Yes.
my wife.
Is she the one that put that on the radar for you, or was it already in your mind before you moved to Singapore that I'm going to start seeking out some help?
It was on my mind before I moved to Singapore, and I started to reach out already a few months before I got the help. I had some uh, messages. I met one friend who I knew was in recovery for a few years, and I went to see her. But I was terrified also because I knew that alcohol was a problem, and once you're into addiction, it's very difficult to imagine a life with it and a
Mm,
life without it. And
mm.
that was where I was sort of caught in that space for some time.
Yeah. What was that like for you? I mean, did you address the alcoholism first through AA, or did you address your mental health needs through counseling first, or was it kind of a two-pronged approach?
It was through the anonymous program first, and not counseling first. So it started in the rooms, and that's where, and I needed medical help to basically get clear the alcohol from my body. I was too poisoned at the time. I needed medication and so on.
Mhm.
But after that, after a month or two, I was on my own device, and then once it's cleared, things look much brighter for me.
Good, good, excellent. And here you are, right? Still sober, 4 years later, plus, right? Good for you.
Yes,
Excellent,
24 hours at a time, as
excellent.
we say, right?
Yeah, so much to dive in there, so much to explore. But I definitely don't want to neglect the fact that as you've found your way, right? And even in writing this book, which we could talk a lot about, this executive loneliness, what was that like for you seeking out other executives to interview? Because it seems like that in itself would be a challenge.
Yes, and Patrick, so if we go back then to 2018, when I was recovering, starting my journey and sobering up, and realized how quickly I started to feel better. Only after a month or two, after start speaking, removing the alcohol, life came back to me, and I was full of joy again. And I started to be so grateful. And when you receive this kind of gift, you want to pass it on. So I wanted to tell the world about it, but I was still not ready. I had not processed it yet. So I only told my wife, and then in the closed environment of the support group, I started to share and talk. And as I got more and more confidence, what happened then in 2019 was what was the reason for me to start writing the book. A friend of mine and a senior executive, a high achiever in Singapore, an expatriate, and he died of suicide.
Hmm.
And it was very sudden, a big surprise to me and everyone who knew him. And we just couldn't imagine why he was gone. Here was a gentleman who had just shared on his social media that he's never been in more love with his girlfriend.
Hmm.
He had just come back from Mount Everest base camp, which was one of his dream trips. He was so fit for that, obviously, and everything else. And we were all blown away when this happened. And that's the moment, Patrick, when I decided to speak up. I decided to tell the world about my recovery journey, and because I realized that if I didn't seek the help, if I didn't hit the rock bottom and get the right help at that time, I have no idea where I would have been later on, because the way I was going down, if it continued down that path, I could have ended up like my friend.
Hmm.
And that was then the wake up call. And I made actually a LinkedIn post first about this, and I started to set up a charity fund to raise money to basically about mental health awareness and suicide prevention. And this post went viral. And before I knew it, I was called by the radio station, and I was on the main radio station in Singapore. Then I was on a full page feature in the newspaper where they interviewed me. And so before I had time to think, I had shared my whole story, and it was out in the press, so there was no turning back. And
Hmm.
and
Wow.
so
Right at the
that's
deep
how
end.
it happened. Mm.
Yes. Yes. And thank goodness it did, right? Because it's a message that needs to be shouted from the mountaintops, right?
Yes, yes, Patrick,
But
and that's because when I got all this media exposure and so on, more and more people said, Nick, you need to write a book about that, and that's how it started.
wow. Is it pretty well accepted in Singapore? And I'm not familiar with that region. I know not all countries are as welcome and open to discussions around mental health.
No, it's a very closed society, and to the point where suicide was only decriminalized in the end of 2019 in Singapore. That means that before that we couldn't even talk about this or have these conversations. So just when this happened, it was also a wave of starting to even have these conversations. And mental health is quite a taboo. That is something that is best not discussed here.
Really? So one can't even express thoughts of suicide, or they couldn't before it was decriminalized.
Yeah. And just starting now, let's say we're at the infant stage of this. Of course, the work that I've done and others around me, plus the pandemic, has helped and made it more, should I say, accepted to discuss mental health, but it's still not compared to with the US at all.
Yeah, I know, at least in the US, I'm sure it's the same everywhere, but with the added isolation from the pandemic, depression doubled at least. And so, has that been your experience in working with executives? With what was the impact of the pandemic?
Well, I can actually give you some numbers here, Patrick, because I started to write the book in 2019 before the pandemic started, and I did a survey of executives, and I basically surveyed them about loneliness. And at that time, 30% of the executives here in Singapore suffered from loneliness, and that was quite aligned with the global statistics. I found sort of around 33% by Statista and so on. But then I did the same survey to the same audience in 2020 during the pandemic, and then it was 59%. So I actually had doubled during the pandemic how they were suffering from loneliness. So the isolation there, obviously trying to run a big business from home, where not having your team or colleagues around you can be quite a lonely affair.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of responsibility on your shoulders too. You know, running a company like that and with all of the uncertainty, I can imagine. Do you?
Yes, and a lot of pressure as well from your perhaps head offices being in US or
Mhm.
Europe, and you're running the region here in Asia, and you're supposed to have all the answers. So yeah, it's in that pressure can be quite difficult to handle.
Yes, I can imagine. So you had the wake up call with the unfortunate suicide of your friend, and then you started getting the word out. You said that it got out quickly, right? More, probably bigger than you expected, right? First through social media, LinkedIn, and then radio stations and so forth. And then came the book.
Yes, and as it happened, I had some friends who had written books, so I asked them for help. So through my recovery journey, then I realized as soon as I have some issue, challenge, or something that excites me that I want to know more about, ask how to do it. I keep asking questions these days, and when you ask people, they're happy to share with you. So I then thought, oh, this is possible. I can do this also. So so that's what I did. So since I started in just before the pandemic, this was actually during the circuit breaker, which I call it here, the lockdown in Singapore. That was my project during the time to complete the book. And it then came out here in April 2021, which was a fantastic timing. Yeah, so that's the story of writing the book.
Wow. And the book that entails your personal experience with executive loneliness. How does that how did you formulate your experience and thoughts around that and into writing? Because I know that's a challenge for many authors, especially first authors, to figure out how do you bottle that? How do you package that? There's so much experience there, and how do you keep your message clear? How do you even know what message you want to send? Because there's a lot to unpack there, right?
Yeah, so first I was thinking of mainly focusing on the survey findings and the interviews of the executives. And I definitely didn't want to have myself on the book cover. I didn't want to be the hero, as I told the
Mm-hmm.
publisher. And I was also in the journey that I'm trying to be more humble, and it's not all about me. I'm not running the show. I said, Nick, this needs your story. So they kept actually pushing me to go deeper and deeper, and here I am.
Oh,
Here is the
excellent.
here is my photo on the cover. So in the end, I had no choice, and I also
Mm,
didn't want to argue with them. So I said, well, I will share my story. And the way I did it was that they asked me a lot of questions, and they helped me to really interview me to go deep. And then once I have written my story multiple times, uh, I asked my wife, because she was by my side. We just got married 3 weeks before I came into recovery. So she was by my side at the worst, and she was there when I started to come back. So I also had to read it and challenge it inside and out, because I wanted it to be real, authentic. So it is the full truth now. She pressed every button, and
Mhm.
it's almost uncomfortable to share that much about yourself, but there it is.
Excellent. Yes, I was imagine that is the fight, because wanting to talk more about the facts and the data and self-disclosure is hard. You know, self-disclosure is hard because it opens wounds. It opens yourself for sometimes criticism. And having not authored a book myself, it just seems to me that would be the hardest thing, is kind of, again, showing your belly a bit and kind of not fighting it so much. So I'm glad you had a good is it your editor or somebody to help you kind of coach you through that. So
Yes, yes, they helped me
excellent.
with that. Yeah.
Excellent. If you or I should say when I'm sure you write your second book. Um what do you think will be what do you think you've learned through the process in terms of uh where you would start, how'd you go about it? What would be some pitfalls you might avoid next time?
Well, I was quite blessed with this project of the book, Patrick, because I realized early on there's two ways you can do this when you write a book. One is that you go and get all different kind of suppliers, or you get a bundled package, and I had a bundled package basically. So yeah, I did have a writing coach who I could call on when I got stuck, and they helped me with the layout, they helped me with the editing, they helped me with the proofreading, and all these kind of things that would have been issues for me. They helped me with the distribution, they helped me go on Amazon, they helped me with audiobook to Audible and all these kind of things. So it was just a full package. So uh, I was blessed that I did my research before, that I didn't do the hard work, as I hear from many who write the first book when they do it from A to Z by themselves, and it can take many many years. That in my case I managed to finish it in 2 years. So my learning would be I would stick to the same. I would get the help needed, and that's the blessing from having been in recovery. I'm not shy to ask for help, to look
Mm.
around, and to make sure I don't overwhelm myself.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a theme here when you think about executives and loneliness, like your main themes, right? And that sense of pride and the smiling depression, not wanting to ask for help versus like, yeah, the 12-step model, recovery, asking for help and asking for guidance, whether it's for mental health or sobriety or writing a book. What has been, what do you think you've learned around that lesson of asking for help? What would you share with our listeners or viewers about those who would be apprehensive or are apprehensive about asking for help? Because even in a country like that's my Oliver, my dog. Um, what would be your recommendation? Because even in a country like America, where there's a lot of encouragement, we try to raise mental health awareness and access to care, and even with that, with managed care, it's not so easy. But regardless of where people are in the world, what would you recommend to kind of combat that impulse to be prideful or ashamed, or the apprehension to putting oneself out there when there's an expressed need?
Well, I also looked into this, and I cover this a bit in the book, Patrick. And the research I found was that 84% of the executives that I surveyed, they would not talk about their challenges related to mental health in the company. That means they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be comfortable to talk to the boss or talk to the HR about the mental health issues. And when you dig deeper, why it's, well, maybe I will not be set up for the next promotion. Maybe they
Mm-hmm.
will not move me to the next country, or they will maybe start gossiping and so on. So that's a big issue. And then would they seek help externally? Well, I found by the Global Mental Health Foundation in the UK that 75% of people don't seek help still for mental health related issues. So if you add those two up, that means that people are not talking about it in the company. They're not seeking help for it. And that is the issue here, that people are not comfortable asking for support for mental health. If they break an arm, they will go to the doctor, But if they have issues mentally, we are in denial, I think, many times, and we are just shy to admit it. And this is what I identified, especially among senior executives. This seems to be a high issue.
Very well said. Have you experienced that there is an actual bias in the executive world, or is that just a self-imposed fear of retaliation, of stigma?
No, I think it's real because I mean, if you are running an organizations with thousands of employees, the company rely on you to be the one, to be the strong one who can handle the heat, and when it's difficult, they need to see you as the calm, solid leader who knows what you're doing, that you have things in order. If you start showing weaknesses and showing that you're not on top of things and not well, then who are they going to appoint perhaps to then run the show? That's I think is the fear on people's mind. And if you're running at the top, you probably set up your life for it. You have expenses and everything else. You're just driving on so much pressure to be able, and you need to perhaps maintain that lifestyle. All your friends are hanging out at the private, membership clubs. You have where you need to pay your expenses, and it's not easy to change that.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it becomes a catch-22.
That's it.
Right. Yeah. So you can't ask for help, but you need the help to do your job, to keep functioning at that level. But if you do ask for help, there's a chance that it's for naught anyway. So it seems extra challenging.
Yeah, and that's why there's so much addictions at this level. I have interviewed also in my book psychotherapists who's working with executives also in Singapore, and addiction is huge, and it can be everything from alcohol, prescribed drugs, recreational drugs, to sex addiction, gambling, and so many more. That is a real issue, because if you have that pressure in your life, how do you deal with it when it becomes overwhelming and you cannot talk about it?
Yeah, and also it probably doesn't help that drinking is socially acceptable. In professional circles, drugs are oftentimes acceptable, right? Ways to cope. And so it seems like the lack of stigma with that versus the stigma of asking for mental health treatment really works against recovery. Absolutely.
It does, and the society is set up for that. And if I'm looking here at Singapore, many of the senior executives will be regional directors. That means that perhaps you're in charge of 15, 20 countries, and you're traveling around those countries, spending 1 or 2 days in each country. So one day you are entertaining your sales team in Vietnam, the next day in India, and then Indonesia. And there's no one really who see you every day. You're traveling around, and you have stay in a 5-star hotel. You have an expense account. Again, you are lonely. You're catching up with it with your team, and still you have to keep your work together. Yet you probably neglect your own health during this journey.
Absolutely. And you just touched on something that I hadn't even thought about. And if you're moving around a lot, or if you're working from home, you really have nobody to hold you accountable, right? Because the same people aren't seeing you day in, day out, right? So they can't say, hey, I noticed you've been drinking a lot this week. Like, you look a little puffier than yesterday. No one to really call you out on that, which makes it easier to hide, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. And I know when I listen to people in the recovery program, there's many people who say that if they're gonna fly to somewhere today, there's no one who would ask for them where they are, perhaps for 2 weeks or so. There's no one who would know. You can just jump on a plane and go somewhere and do what you want without being accountable.
Yeah. Well, you certainly are a wealth of information, and I've already touched on so many things that never would have even registered for me. For those who are seeking to climb that ladder, right, who have that gumption to make it to the top, if you were, what words of wisdom would you impart? What nuggets of experience and advice would you say would be the most valuable, or that if you could go back in time and tell yourself, give yourself a few words of wisdom, what would that be?
Well, I think it's very important to have the support around you, and it may be a few things depending on what the person prefer, but there are wonderful coaches who can work with you side by side, so you have someone who you can talk to when you face challenges, who can challenge you as well, and get perhaps a mentor or two, get someone inside the organization who's more senior, that's normally provided by the company, but get someone perhaps outside the organization. And also what I'm working with now, Patrick, what I'm passionate about is confidential peer groups. So in my work now, we do confidential peer groups for senior executives, and but also middle managers, so that you can belong to a group with like-minded. So we have groups, for example, for key account managers. We have peer groups even for the ones who are working in communication, marketing. So you belong to a group. It's almost like your own tribe, where you have people who speak your language, who understand your field, and then these meetings are confidential. So you sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you can come in there and discuss your work-related challenges. Your competitor is not there. None of your colleagues can be in the same group. So this should be your safe space where you can discuss the conflicts you are facing in your work, and everyone there will help you, and you will help them how to solve it. So that if I had something like this set up, the coach, mentor, and or a support group, all of it, then I would have clearly not made the decisions I made year after year by making my own decisions rather than listening and learning and talking to others. So that would be my recommendations.
That's fantastic. I'm surprised you didn't lead with that. That's that makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's such a niche culture, right? And
Yes.
having some others that speak the language, like you said, that understand the challenges and the what's at risk, right? With your reputation and impression management, right? And with your peers, and and to take it even a step further with you said the non-disclosure agreement, that's even more probably effective, right, than just the honor code of 12 step, right? And just kind of hoping that, even in 12 step, like I mean, they don't discourage dual relationships, right? If you have a family or a sibling or a brother, anyone's allowed in the group, right?
Yeah.
But you guys have taken it a step further where you make sure that's protected, right?
Yes,
That
we
autonomy.
keep the groups around 30 members or so, 35 max. And if someone wants to join the group, we need to circulate their profile to all the existing members group, just to check in to make sure there's no conflict, because also someone probably don't want to have the neighbor or an ex-wife joining the group as well. So you should feel comfortable, and this should really be that safe space that you reach out. It should be your natural first go-to when you're facing a work-related challenge. And they meet face to face for half a day, 6 times a year. But then in between, there's a mobile app where they can post queries. So if they're sitting at the desk right now and they have an issue, they can write and the group members can help them. So it's almost like you have a tool at your hand. So whenever you get that feeling of, oh, what should I do, and overwhelming, and perhaps that loneliness will creep in because you're sitting there and you don't know what to do, then you have someone there. And that is something that is, I just wish I knew about when I started my career.
Well, that is simply fantastic. That's part of your company that you've built out, or is that some other agency or?
You have a lot of these networks also in the US, especially. But I'm part of my company is called EGN, Executive Global Network. It was founded in Denmark in '92. But yeah, you have a lot of them. Vistage is in the US. They're huge, and many others. So if you look up peer networks, you can look for senior executives or whatever. But not only at the senior executives, we have, if I'm looking at Denmark, which is mature market, we have peer groups for head chefs. We have peer groups
Really?
for secretaries and canteen
Excellent.
managers. Yeah.
Excellent. And that must do wonders for culture. I just imagine you have this company and everybody has a breathing space, a safe place to really to process their feelings, right? Instead of containing everything. That would do wonders for the work culture, right? Because I see a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, especially large ones, they'll encourage culture, right? And want to be approachable in management, but there's still, I think at any level, there's still that fear of too much self-disclosure puts you on the map, on the radar, right? And nobody wants to be on the radar in case, something should happen. It just, everyone is subject to some kind of bias, implicit bias, whether they like it or not. And I think we all understand that on a deep level, that we, even if we feel safe, we still manage impressions, right? It's human nature. And so to have a place where we can breathe easy and process is priceless. And the fact that you guys are doing that across the board for different levels, right, of the company, for those who are in companies, and whether they're secretary or management, to have a place, that's fantastic.
Yeah, we provide a certified facilitator, which is like a moderator to the sessions, because otherwise people won't speak up. And it's the role of this person to also reach out to the members in between sessions and to pick the brain and see, okay, so Patrick, now you're coming to a session here. Do you have something that is on your mind, something that you want to discuss? And then this facilitator will prep the person, be ready for it. And they can even put themselves in a hot seat if there's a real burning issue that they want to lay out for the group to discuss. And just imagine, for example, that you're a part of a group for head chefs. You started your career cooking in a kitchen, and perhaps you are cooking tasty food. You got a couple of promotions, and down the line you find yourself suddenly managing 200 chefs in a big hotel. You don't know about finance, you don't know about leadership, you have not been to university learning these things, and there's a lot of people in those positions. So for these people especially, it's important to have this group of then other like-minded who's working in other facilities, other hotels, other venues, in a casino, whatever, then having similar roles, just to again feel that sympathy, because we need it as human beings. We need to feel that I'm not the only one going through that. There's someone else there and someone else who can help me. And that is where I find a lot of answers to the topic we've been discussing today, and how to get out of loneliness and how to prevent it.
Excellent. I'm for one very happy to see the movement of peer support, and peer support groups, and that we don't just pathologize everything and label it, and it's only reserved for those who qualify for that kind of help, you know what I mean? And then having to wait 6 months to be seen. So I'm just really, really excited to see this movement and the part you're playing in it, a big part in helping to raise awareness around self-care, self-compassion, self-love, recovery, and holistic care and preventative care, really, because what we're talking about is stress management, right? Stress management goes a long way to prevent things like burnout, and then all of the time it takes to kind of get that territory back. So excellent. Really, really appreciate the work you're doing, Nick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yes. So where can our audience learn more about you? Where should we send them?
Well, I'm quite active posting what I do on LinkedIn, and that's hopefully a balanced view now. So if someone look up on LinkedIn Nick Jonsson, it's NickJonsson, then they find me on LinkedIn. Or if someone go to Amazon and punch in executive loneliness, then they can see my best-selling book. It was actually topping, even if it was just for a day, the top mental health in the US for one day, and also men's health. It was #1 bestseller for a day.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'm going to add that to my reading list. So let's see here. This must be your site, right?
Yes, that's nickjonsson.com, my website. Can go there also, yes.
And this is another place people can learn more about you, right?
Yes.
A little background, a little story, your book. Oh, you have a blog.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, don't leave that out. That's fantastic.
I will make sure I post this episode there, Patrick.
Yes, that'd be fantastic. I will link all of this, of course, up into the show notes for anyone who wants to give it a check it out, and lots of good stuff there. All right. I appreciate you being on the show. All right. So if there's anything else you would like to share in the future, I would love to have you back on the show, and just feel free to reach out. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Patrick. Right. Thanks for helping to remove the stigma discussing this.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. And you enjoy your day. I know you've got a full day ahead of you. being on the opposite side of the world and all.
Yeah. Thank you,
All
Patrick.
right. You
Bye
take
for
care.
now.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Another tool to help you thrive. Hey, if you're getting value from this content, be sure to like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to the MHT newsletter, where you'll find all kinds of freebies waiting for you around personal development, anxiety, depression, and clinical skills. And you'll stay updated on the blog, podcast, and YouTube channel to boot. So I hope you're doing well. You take care. Until next time, go make good things happen. Bye-bye.
You're gone now, will you call me back? Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. You're the traveler.